Book title: My Witch. By Rudranj Chauhan. Chapter 2: Folk Stories. I am sitting by the window. It must be around 2 a.m. My room is dimly lit, and I'm naked under my shawl. There's an annoying pimple on my face that I refuse to treat with my mom's home remedies because the last time I did, it resulted in 2 more pimples in the same spot. I've rested my head against the window pane. My bed is strangely positioned, and I've just put up a new poster of my favorite singer, Michael, on the wall. I'm contemplating my luck. It's been so disappointing. I met my dad briefly, but he left quickly. My mom, well, she's in depression, but she never shows it. I've caught her taking those pills a few times, but I've stopped talking to her about it. I'm pretty miserable myself. I can make some selfish noise, but that's where I'm at. It's been 2 or 3 days, and I still haven't made any friends at school. I tried to befriend a girl, but when I approached her, she was crying. I couldn't see what she was writing on her paper, but I'll ask her about it later. I'm in the 12th grade, studying subjects like economics, geography, history, agriculture, and psychology, but my favorites are economics and political science. Then, the thought of that boy, Harry, crossed my mind. I hadn't asked for her last name because our conversation had only lasted for about 10 to 15 minutes. Just then, I saw birds flying outside. My eyelids started to feel heavy, and I realized I was getting sleepy. I managed to lie down on the bed somehow, closed my eyes, and fell asleep. My sleep was abruptly interrupted when I found myself in a dream, chasing a boy who kept calling me Destiny. I woke up and, in a rush, saw myself in the mirror. I appeared as a woman who seemed to be perpetually drinking alcohol, at least that's how it felt. But, at least I wasn't actually drinking. Afterward, I went to the bathroom, brushed my teeth, washed my face, and tended to some personal tasks. During this time, I could hear the sounds of someone in the kitchen, perhaps chopping vegetables and moving around. As I stepped out of the bathroom, I could see the stairs leading downstairs. I descended and arrived in the hallway, and as I proceeded forward, I could hear the clinking sounds of someone preparing a meal. I approached quietly, and there was my mother, her back to me, slicing something. I took a seat at the dining table. "Mom, please, hurry up with breakfast, I need to get to school quickly," I said because there was going to be a talk on the history of this town at our school today, and I didn't want to miss that class at all. "Dear, wake up quickly," my mom replied, but I couldn't help feeling a bit annoyed when she used the term dear. "Alright, sorry, Mum." "Okay." Then, after a while, she handed me a sandwich with jam. Was she treating me like a little child? I used to think that every time I saw this. I had my meal, changed into my school uniform, and then said goodbye to my mom before heading out. As I left the house, I observed my neighborhood. There was an uncle walking his dog, an aunt drying clothes, and another uncle was having an argument with an older woman. I stepped out onto the street in front of my house. Today, the road looked different, lined with trees and greenery, and the houses seemed nicer. I walked ahead and found a taxi. The fare was a bit high, but I decided to compromise. Afterward, I made it to school. I reached school and entered the arts building. The room was quite spacious with several desks. The chairs were like those you'd find in an office, and the room had a pristine white interior with a wooden door. As I walked in, some girls noticed me and offered smiles, a few made faces, and others simply didn't acknowledge me. I proceeded to my seat and, as you'd expect, started gazing out the window. Some kids were playing volleyball outside, and some girls were watching them. They seemed like typical teenagers. That's when I heard a familiar voice, one I'd been waiting to hear for days. "Hey, how are you?" It was Harry. But today, he looked a bit under the weather. I replied that I was fine, but he quickly admitted that he was feeling unwell. However, he had to be present for today's interesting class. "Are you not from around here?" Harry asked me. "No, and you?" "I am from Dash," but he paused because the professor had just entered. "Enough of the small talk. Sit down quietly, and let's start the history lesson," the professor said, looking like a monkey. The whole class responded with an odd mix of voices. I glanced around the nearly empty classroom. There weren't many people around. Harry, seated next to me, fixated his gaze on the professor's every word, just like he did in class. A girl sitting nearby was quietly weeping as she tried to write something. I was curious about her reason for tears. Then, I heard the professor's voice, and I, too, began to pay attention to what they were saying. In 1399, this town was founded. It was initially under the rule of the Kingswood Empire, but from 1568, it came under British Empire's control. However, it's not just known for its history, it's also famous for its written folk stories, the professor explained. Folk stories? A girl stood up from her seat and exclaimed, "It's not folk stories, you know what, these are real stories." "I don't believe," the professor shouted back, "do you think there are creatures like werewolves or witches who practice black magic, educated madwomen, and such things in real life?" The entire class was now engaged in the discussion, and I also wished to speak up and tell the professor they lacked proper manners. The girl's face lit up with joy, but she chose to remain silent. She calmly sat back down and started gazing at her notebook in front of her with determined eyes. The professor continued, "In 1889, almost half of the jungles here were destroyed in a massive fire. But the local people here value their environment and nature. They've managed to bring back the greenery." Then the professor challenged, "Do you really believe in black magic? Show me some evidence. Trust me, it doesn't exist. These are just really good folk stories." I wanted to learn more about the local stories, so I stood up and said, "Professor, could you share a couple more folk stories with us?" "Sure, I don't mind." "Please have a seat," the professor replied. I took my seat and noticed that Harry was slowly tapping his foot on the ground and had one of his nails in his mouth, looking a bit agitated. In 1762, this town was terrorized by witches who went on a killing spree, and their husbands, the werewolves, were equally menacing. However, a human took out a hidden sword and managed to defeat more than half of the witches and their werewolf partners. "But it's just a folk story, can anyone tell me where that sword is?" the professor asked. No one responded to the professor's query. "Look, these are all just stories," the professor remarked. Just then, the school bell rang, signaling the end of the lecture, and everyone headed to their next class. Since this was a free period, students chatted and engaged in various activities. Harry took out a book and began writing something. I got up from my desk and approached the beautiful girl with blonde hair and blue eyes. "Hello, I'm Rowena," I introduced myself. "Hello, I'm Sarah," she replied. "How are you?" I asked. "I'm fine, thanks." "What about you?" she inquired. "I'm good. I noticed you were crying while writing yesterday, and I was concerned, so I said. Her expression changed, and she seemed hesitant. "Oh, I can't tell you, but you know what, thank you for asking," she told me. "Okay, that's fine," I reassured her. "Would you like to have lunch with me?" I asked, and she replied with a yes. During lunch, we ate in the school canteen, and by the end of it, we had become friends. "Okay, see you tomorrow," she said as we stood outside the school gates. "Bye-bye," I replied, and she left, waving with a smile, getting into her taxi. When I got home, I found my mom watching TV. I thought it would be nice to have a chat with her, so I approached and asked, "How are you, Mum?" "I'm fine, dear. What about you?" "I'm fine. You know what? I made a new friend today," I told her. "Wow, that's great. And I'm sorry for being angry this morning, you know I tend to get angry quickly," she said. "It's okay, Mum," I replied. After that, we chatted a bit, watched TV, had dinner, and then went to our respective rooms. For the next few hours in my room, I couldn't stop thinking about that story, the girl, and Harry. After a while, sleep began to overcome me, so I lay down on my bed and drifted off to sleep. To be continued.